In the pre-dawn hours of an early day in April 205 BC, the capital of the state of Chu, Pengcheng, modern-day Chuzhou, was still shrouded in a heavy curtain of darkness. However, on the main road approaching Pengcheng from the west, two cavalrymen were galloping furiously. They were not messengers with feathered letters, but defeated soldiers. They raced all the way to the Han army camp outside Pengcheng, shouting as they rode, "Make way! Make way! Urgent military intelligence! The Chu army is here! The Chu army is here!" When the news finally reached the Chu palace inside Pengcheng, the king of Han, Liu Bang, who was still lingering in his bed, simply could not believe his ears. He exclaimed in a mixture of terror and rage, "The Chu army is here? How is that possible? Who dares to report false intelligence? Scout again! Report again!" However, reality soon calmed Liu Bang down. More and more scattered defeated troops fled back to Pengcheng from the west, all bringing undeniable news. The Chu army had indeed arrived, and they had already occupied Xiao County, a crucial node on the Han army's supply line. Liu Bang still dared not fully believe it, but he issued the order for a general mobilization. At this moment, it had been only a few short days since he had launched his eastern expedition and captured Pengcheng. Just as dawn broke, on the plains west of Pengcheng, over 100,000 Han troops finally completed their assembly and formation. They lined up from south to north, facing west, with their backs to the morning sun, occupying a geographical advantage. Behind them were two rivers, eliminating the possibility of an attack from the rear. The armies of the other feudal states participating in the anti-Chu coalition also formed arrays around the main position, serving as nodes for support and reliance. Due to the proximity to lakes and rivers, the moisture was heavy, and the morning plain was covered in thick fog. Standing on the high platform of his command chariot, Liu Bang looked vigilantly toward the west. Beside him was his most trusted charioteer, Xiahou Ying. The fog was still filled with a deathly silence. The infantry phalanxes of the Han army were making final adjustments and deployments under the command of their officers. Liu Bang was still puzzled. Why did the Chu army, which should have been hundreds of kilometers away, arrive so suddenly? No army could possess such marching speed. And why was there absolutely no news from his own grand army that was supposed to be blocking the main Chu force from Pengcheng? Were they annihilated? Or worse, did they defect? Just as Liu Bang was lost in anxious thoughts, the clear sound of a bugle came from the fog. An armored warhorse and an exceptionally burly general, wearing a white cape, emerged from the mist. When Liu Bang saw him clearly, he gasped a breath of cold air. He was both shocked and delighted. Shocked because this was a figure he knew all too well, the heavily armored Xiang Yu holding his halberd. Delighted because he saw clearly what was emerging from the fog behind Xiang Yu, one after another. It was entirely cavalry. Liu Bang breathed a sigh of relief. This explained everything. Why could Xiang Yu appear so suddenly? Because he had abandoned the cornerstones of victory. He had left behind the pike phalanxes composed of infantry and the war chariots. He was conducting a light cavalry raid, just to rush back to his lost capital as quickly as possible. In front of Liu Bang's army of hundreds of thousands, wasn't this a suicide mission? Liu Bang finally let down his suspended heart. He waved his hand. Formation, attack. This battle, crucial to the founding period of the Han dynasty, this battle, sufficient to be written into the history of Chinese military development. This battle, celebrated for thousands of years due to its incredible outcome. This battle, which would thoroughly crown the overlord Xiang Yu as a god, had officially begun. Merely a year prior, Xiang Yu, in his 20s, and Liu Bang, nearing 50, were still sworn brothers despite their age difference. They were both anti-Qin generals under King Huai of Chu, Chongxin. One annihilated the last two mobile army groups of the Qin Empire at Julu in the north. The other executed a strategic detour to break into the empty Guanzhong region and capture the imperial capital, Xianyang. After the political negotiations at the feast at Hongmen, the two reached a tacit understanding. With the support of the allied generals, Xiang Yu partitioned the world, establishing 19 feudal lords. He overturned the unified system of the Qin, intending to return to the feudal system of the spring and autumn period, and the overlord stabilizing this system was Xiang Yu himself. To achieve this goal and prevent the resurgence of the Qin Empire, he gave Liu Bang, the commoner general who had lived and died with him for years, a vast amount of land including Sichuan, Chongqing, and Hanzhong, making him the second most powerful feudal lord in the world, second only to his own western Chu. He also added 30,000 elite troops to Liu Bang's command so that he could monitor the 3 feudal states established in the old Qin lands. Then, Xiang Yu led his grand army east out of the Hangu Pass, seizing lands from the old kings of the 6 states according to his own ideas. After another half-year of fighting, Emperor Yi, the former king of Chu, the nominal leader of the anti-Qin forces, was killed by Xiang Yu and the allied lords. Xiang Yu's grand plan was successful. He established Emperor Yi's capital, Pengcheng, as the capital of his own western Chu. From here, he would monitor the world as the overlord of the feudal lords. However, the good times did not last long. In August of 206 BC, just over a month after Xiang Yu established his capital at Pengcheng, a civil war broke out in the northern state of Qi. To weaken Qi, Xiang Yu had divided it into 3, but the 2 lords he supported were no match for the old aristocrat Tianrong. Soon, Tianrong unified Qi and openly opposed Xiang Yu. Immediately after, the old aristocrat of the Zhao state, Zhang Er, borrowed troops from Qi to drive away the king of Changshan, supported by Xiang Yu, and welcomed back the old king of Zhao. Zhao also turned into a mess of chaos. Since Zhao and Qi were powerful northern states adjacent to Chu, Xiang Yu believed this was a mortal threat that had to be solved immediately. He led his entire main force north to suppress the rebellion. However, right at this moment, his good brother Liu Bang suddenly burst out of Hanzhong, defeated the 3 Qin land lords enfeoffed by Xiang Yu, and recovered the Guanzhong region, which Emperor Yi had originally promised him. In his astonishment, Xiang Yu did not immediately understand Liu Bang's intentions. He merely killed the old king of Han, Han State, who was friendly with Liu Bang, and appointed a new king of Han to stand between Liu Bang and himself. The Chu army continued to concentrate on quelling the rebellion in Qi. In early 205 BC, the invincible Chu army, under Xiang Yu's personal command, thoroughly defeated the main force of Qi. But unexpectedly, due to the Chu army's brutal massacres of cities, the people of Qi rose up in rebellion everywhere. Xiang Yu was bogged down in an endless security war and could not extricate himself. Liu Bang saw all of Xiang Yu's embarrassment and strategic passivity. Then, this brother, whom Xiang Yu had ignored, made his move. In February of 205 BC, taking advantage of Xiang Yu and the main Chu force being in the northern state of Qi, Liu Bang moved out with almost all his Han forces in full strength. He had 100,000 troops when he conquered Xianyang. When he was enfeoffed as the king of Han, Xiang Yu gave him another 30,000. Plus the recruitment and replenishment in Hanzhong, his direct Han troops should have been close to 200,000 at this time, except for leaving some forces to guard the rear and surround enemies who had not yet surrendered. Liu Bang led over 100,000 Han troops, plus the surrendered troops of the Sai and Di kingdoms, a total surely exceeding 250,000, and crossed the Yellow River into the territory of Wei. Wei Bao, the king of Western Wei who came from old aristocracy, joined the Han army, partly because he was dissatisfied with Xiang Yu weakening Wei, and partly because he was intimidated by the Han military power. Thus, the coalition forces exceeded 300,000. They then attacked eastward, taking the kingdoms of Yin, Henan, and Han through military force and political mediation. At this time, the northern state of Zhao also sent troops south to participate in Liu Bang's great cause against Chu. Liu Bang controlled the armies of 5 feudal states, plus his own Han army. It is said the total reached an astonishing 560,000. Then, they held a funeral for Emperor Yi, who had been killed by Xiang Yu in Luoyang, weeping for 3 days and nights, and issued a denunciation of Xiang Yu, swearing to avenge Emperor Yi, placing themselves on the invincible moral high ground. Immediately after, in March of 205 BC, the Grand Army of 560,000 officially began the war to punish Chu. Far away in Qi, Xiang Yu was furious upon hearing the news, but the quagmire of the Qi War had reached its most critical moment. The original king of Qi, Tianrong, was dead, and the new anti-Chu leader, Tianheng, was firmly pinned down by the Chu army in the isolated city of Chenyang. Seeing that the north was about to be pacified, Xiang Yu did not want to fall short of success at the last stage, so he allowed Liu Bang to advance eastward while he concentrated on resolving the Qi War. Against this backdrop, the 560,000-strong army led by Liu Bang marched triumphantly. They only encountered resistance from Chu detachments at Waihuang and Dingtao, both of which were easily crushed by Liu Bang. Even Xiang Yu's relative Xiang surrendered to Liu Bang after being defeated. Thus, in early April of 205 BC, the anti-Chu coalition captured the Chu capital, Pengcheng. This must have been Liu Bang's strategic vision, to launch a strategic sneak attack while Xiang Yu's rear was empty. But he likely did not expect the result to come so easily. Aside from 2 battles where they had absolute overwhelming superiority, they encountered almost no decent resistance. Where were the battle-hardened Chu elites? Where was the invincible Xiang Yu? Perhaps the victory came too suddenly for Liu Bang to recover his senses. Perhaps the magnificence of the Chu royal palace in Pengcheng seduced him. But more likely, the coalition had not yet reached a clear consensus on their next strategic move. Regardless, history records that the coalition halted at Pengcheng. They collected its treasures and beauties, feasting day and night. On one hand, they were distributing rewards to consolidate their political alliances. On the other, they were planning the next phase of the war. Objectively speaking, Liu Bang did not stay in Pengcheng for long, at least not long enough to commit a fatal strategic blunder. Moreover, he had actually issued clear instructions for the defense of Pengcheng. First, let's zoom out to a bird's-eye view and study the geographical conditions near Pengcheng. On today's map, we can see that to the entire northwest of Pengcheng lies the huge Waishan Lake, with a total area of over 1,200 square kilometers. But 2,200 years ago, this was not yet a lake, but a dense network of water systems and wetlands, including the Sai River and Feng River. Besides the dense water network, although the terrain around Pengcheng is mainly vast plains suitable for large mechanized corps to gallop, scattered isolated mountain strongholds constituted fatal tactical nodes. About 20 kilometers west of Pengcheng lies Shao County, where low hills like Hu Mountain and Long Mountain are distributed. Further west, Mangdang Mountain stands as an abrupt barrier on the plain. 20-some li southeast of Pengcheng, Livliang Mountain locks the Sai River, forming dangerous rapids. And around Lingbi, about 50 kilometers south of Pengcheng, the terrain is rugged and adjacent to the Sui River. This river, originating from Chenliu in the west, lies across the path of southward escape. Directly north of Pengcheng, crossing the Si and Feng rivers, lie the hilly areas composed of Mount Tai and the Yimeng Mountains, which are completely unsuitable for the passage of large army corps. At this time, the main force of Xiang Yu's army was piled up in the territory of Qi, 300 kilometers from Pengcheng. The most likely marching route was to use the plains from today's Linyi and Zhaozhuang to move south. So, if you were Liu Bang, how would you deploy your strategy? According to historical records, Liu Bang handed the main army to his brother-in-law Fan Kuai, ordering him to set up defensive positions in the Shui County area north of Pengcheng, blocking the way between Xiang Yu and Pengcheng. At the same time, he had his other brother-in-law Lu Zhe lead another army to station at Dang County directly west of Pengcheng, securing the grain route and rear area coming from Luoyang and Xingyang. Liu Bang himself led the coalition's central army, contracting into Pengcheng to plan the next move. Is there a problem? There is no problem at all. Under the war technology conditions of 2,200 years ago, Xiang Yu in the north could not break through the hilly areas of the southern Shandong Mountains and the dense water network northwest of Pengcheng, unless he abandoned his war chariots and infantry phalanxes, which in the tactical system of that time almost meant certain defeat. Simultaneously, mountains and water networks also meant his supply lines would be more fragile, also unfavorable for large corps operations. Therefore, following military common sense, Liu Bang arranged heavy troop groups for defense in the most likely and almost only direction of Xiang Yu's attack. This is akin to the French army deployed on the Maginot Line. Of course, everyone knows the result. According to historical records, after learning that Pengcheng had been taken, Xiang Yu made a shocking decision. He left behind the large force, including chariots and infantry, and led 30,000 elites secretly south, although historical records do not explicitly state that these 30,000 were all cavalry. Judging from the efficiency of completing a 300-kilometer maneuver in just a few days, only a pure cavalry mobile force could achieve this. Through some means unknown to us, not excluding inside help from Chu generals who had previously surrendered to Liu Bang, Xiang Yu grasped the entire coalition's strategic deployment with extreme precision. Then, with an operation akin to a surgical scalpel, he moved west from the southern Shandong hilly region, bypassed the dense water network, then turned south, slotting exactly between Lu Zi's western garrison force and Pengcheng. He rapidly occupied Xiao County on the coalition's supply line, and then, without stopping, immediately launched an attack to the east. What Xiang Yu performed was a decapitation raid guaranteed by ultra-high mobility. He intended to strike the heart. Black Tiger steals the heart, killing with one blow before Liu Bang and the coalition of princes could react. This is also the fundamental reason why the entire Han army felt a massive shock when Xiang Yu appeared on Liu Bang's western flank in an extremely short time. Strategically speaking, this was impossible. Tactically speaking, this was a suicidal sneak attack. Including Liu Bang, everyone was asking, where did Xiang Yu get so many cavalry? Let us briefly recount the development status of Chinese cavalry technology 2,200 years ago. Simply summarized into 3 points. First, soft saddles surpassing simple bareback riding, or blankets had been popularized, allowing for a leap in control for mounted soldiers. Second, stirrups had not yet been invented, so cavalry impact was still limited, and using long-handled or two-handed weapons on horseback relied heavily on the rider's personal martial arts. Third, based on the above 2 points, cavalry was barely an independent branch at the time, serving more as an auxiliary to infantry phalanxes and chariots. Even in the state of Zhao, famous for its cavalry, they were primarily high-mobility light-armored horse archers. Coupled with the huge cost of horse breeding and cavalry training, the Central Plains states focused more energy on war chariots, this weapon of lethal impact. The most important indicator for evaluating a country's military capability was the number of chariots, hence the terms state of 1,000 chariots and state of 10,000 chariots. So, under such a historical background, how did Xiang Yu, a man from the Chu state in the southeast, scrape together 30,000 cavalry? Modern historians analyze that Xiang Yu's 30,000 cavalry likely had 3 main sources. First were the local Bao cavalry of the southeast, later known in the Han dynasty as the famous Yue cavalry, Yue Qi. Although the southeast could not compare to the northeast and northwest, the area north of the Huai River was actually an important horse-producing region. Almost all horses in the Song dynasty came from here. Xiang Yu, who started in the southeast and controlled Wu and Yue, had a stable source of Yue cavalry. However, due to the size of the horses and the level of equipment, these Yue cavalry mostly undertook combat tasks of light-armored long-range harassment. Second were the northern nomadic cavalry, specifically the Lufan cavalry. The names of these cavalrymen appear multiple times in historical records. They were not only skilled at mounted archery, but also had decent close-quarters combat skills. These were likely a small number of mercenary-like cavalry acquired by Xiang Yu in the north, around the time of the Battle of Julu. Third, and most importantly, were the Zhuyuan cavalry from the original Qin state's Great Wall Legion. These cavalry were originally formed by the Qin state to counter the Xiongnu, and were superior to the Xiongnu in terms of equipment and tactics. Although Xiang Yu buried a large number of Qin prisoners of war alive at Xin'an, the Zhuyuan cavalry, possessing superhuman combat literacy, were certainly not among them, but were absorbed by him as the elite of the Chu cavalry. Years later, before his death, when Xiang Yu wanted to give his famous Wuzhui horse to the village head of Wujiang, he said the horse had followed him for 5 years, which calculates back to being a trophy he obtained when incorporating the Zhuyuan cavalry. So, when Liu Bang finally settled his mind, he figured it all out. Xiang Yu had gambled everything to bring 30,000 cavalry. While this was an incredible surprise move, it was not an impossible fantasy. And in Liu Bang's view, although Xiang Yu brought the largest recorded cavalry maneuver group in Chinese war history to date, facing his hundreds of thousands of infantry and chariot phalanxes firmly defending Pengcheng, it was undoubtedly like striking a stone with an egg. At this moment, standing on the high platform of his command chariot, Liu Bang even felt a sway of excitement. Could it be that he could settle everything in one single battle? The morning mist had not yet dispersed, and contact had already begun between the two sides. Following standard engagement procedures, dozens of Han long spear phalanxes halted their advance, formed battle lines, and waited in full array. Light infantry equipped with shields, short swords, and crossbows moved forward to form a skirmish line. This was a combat method inherited from the Qin state, emphasizing the engagement principle of distinct roles and alternating advances. Before long, rushing out first from the morning mist were the Chu army's Yue cavalry. Like their counterparts in the northern state of Zhao, These light armored horse archers used high-speed maneuvers to approach the Han infantry line, fired a wave of arrows, then circled back to retreat, repeating the process back and forth. This was almost a reenactment of the harassment tactics of horse archers from the past 100 years, which did not have much lethality against battle-hardened infantry. The Han skirmishers immediately formed a shield wall in the front row to withstand the incoming arrow rain, while the archers and crossbowmen behind the shield wall returned fire with long-range firepower. The horse bows of the Yue cavalry were limited by their draw weight, with range significantly inferior to the infantry's foot bows and winch-drawn crossbows. They were not dominant in a shootout, and suppressed by the firepower of the Han skirmishers, it was difficult for them to get close enough to shoot arrows into the effective range of the shieldless long spear phalanxes. Fortunately, benefiting from high mobility, their losses from the Han infantry's long-range counterattack were not too great. The Yue cavalry cycled back and forth, projecting repeatedly, but did not achieve significant results. Instead, the Han infantry line, under no pressure, gradually pressed forward, slowly detaching from their initial preset positions. Of course, the preset positions at that time were nothing precious, lacking even abatis stakes, because no horse archer would be foolish enough to charge into an infantry phalanx. A contemptuous smile had already risen on the corners of the Han frontline officers' mouths. Is this the invincible Chu army? However, they would soon know how wrong they were. Out of the mist, another wave of Yue cavalry rushed out. Although the scale this time looked much larger than the previous probing, what use was it if their arrows couldn't penetrate the shield wall of the skirmish line? But this time, the Yue cavalry ignored casualties and charged until they were very close to the skirmish line. Only then did they suddenly loose their arrows and then rapidly retreat to both sides. Just as the Han skirmishers were confused amidst the mist and the dust raised by the Yue cavalry, they saw a scene they had never witnessed before. They first saw the war horses. Unlike the unarmored ponies ridden by the Yue cavalry, these were tall steeds rarely seen in the south. Most importantly, like those chariot horses charged with breaking formations, they were all draped in leather horse armor adorned with armor plates. And atop these armored war horses were fully armed heavy cavalry, clad in lamellar armor, some even wearing metal masks. They wielded long spears and long halberds, carrying no bows or crossbows, and charged straight at the Han skirmish line. Hooves flew, war drums thundered. Even the most battle-hardened officers had never seen such a scene. In the panic, someone shouted, "Fire arrows! Shoot the horses!" However, arrows hastily fired at such short range could not inflict damage on the galloping armored war horses. In an instant, before any Han soldiers could react, the Chu cavalry slammed into the shield wall, the shields shattered, the wall collapsed. The immense weight and inertia easily crushed the Han skirmish line. The Chu cavalry moved as if entering an uninhabited land, slaughtering the Han skirmishers and crossbowmen who lacked long weapons. No amount of superb personal martial arts or combat experience could come into play against this absolute gap in strength and speed. In almost an instant, the entire Han front line collapsed. They didn't even have time to react, didn't even have time to turn and run. Although the long spear phalanxes, maintaining a certain distance behind the skirmishers, were still in shock, combat instinct made them raise their long spears, preparing to stop these unknown monster cavalry just as they would a chariot charge. But these heavy armored cavalry, after crushing and eliminating the Han front line and driving them back, turned their horses around and vanished into the mist. On the position where they had just been, there was dead silence. Watching from the rear, Liu Bang gasped a breath of cold air. He had never seen such cavalry shock tactics, nor could he imagine what would be encountered next. But he feigned calm. The phalanxes are still there. I haven't lost yet." This was likely the first recorded large-scale use of shock cavalry in Chinese war history. It completely overturned the previous Chinese cavalry combat methods and had an extremely important impact on subsequent military history. Of course, its appearance was not a sudden stroke of genius. It was the inevitable result born of various coincidences. First was the horse armor developed in chariot technology, making it possible for armored war horses to charge without fear of arrows. Second was the exchange with excellent horse breeds from northern nomadic peoples, improving the load-bearing and running capabilities of war horses. Third was the popularization of new horse tack, including soft saddles and girths. Fourth, and most importantly, was Xiang Yu's own superclass martial arts and breakthrough understanding of mounted techniques. Xiang Yu was a burly man, nearly 2 meters tall. Historical records repeatedly mention him putting on armor, mounting a horse, and fighting with a halberd. This indicates he had extremely high personal combat ability and could proficiently use two-handed or long-handled weapons on horseback without stirrups. He could completely train a group of knights with equally superb mounted skills according to the experience and educational methods he summarized, then equip them with the fiercest war horses and the best armor, providing the best treatment. This method could absolutely form a super-elite cavalry team, small in number, but where one could match 100. When serving as an offensive arrowhead or a breakthrough weapon, they could often achieve miraculous results. This is the secret behind the birth of the first scaled shock cavalry unit in Chinese war history. Of course, this method inevitably brought ultra-high equipment and training costs, which determined that the number of these shock cavalry could not be too high. It was absolutely impossible to reach 30,000. Therefore, among Xiang Yu's 30,000 men, besides a very small number of elite shock cavalry, there were the previously mentioned large numbers of Yuan cavalry, as well as a large number of de facto mounted infantry. They only used horses as tools for high-speed strategic and battlefield maneuvering. Even for these elite Chu heavy cavalry, historical records explicitly state that when needed, they would dismount to fight, just like Western dismounted knights. And this multidimensional variable unit composition provided Xiang Yu with superb tactical variability. When the Han soldiers began to consciously contract their battle line, preparing to adopt the dense formation used against chariot charges to counter the Chu army's next wave of cavalry charge, what rushed out of the mist were the Yue cavalry, bows drawn and arrows nocked. This time, there was no skirmish line to counter them. They galloped before the Han phalanxes and loosed a rain of arrows. Han soldiers, without shield protection, fell to arrows one after another, with no way to return fire. The remaining rear-row crossbowmen fell into a dilemma. Hiding behind the long spear phalanx, the range was insufficient to hit the horse archers. But if they moved to the front of the long spear phalanx, the annihilation of the skirmish line just now would be their consequence. Amidst their confusion, the Han infantry continued to be attacked by arrow rain from the archer cavalry circling to their flanks. And at this time, even from the frontal direction, a massive number of crossbow bolts were fired. The Chu mounted infantry had dismounted, and their formed crossbow line was continuously projecting firepower at the Han army. Just as the morale of the Han phalanxes began to drop, and the formation became slightly chaotic, a deafening roar of killing shouts came from the morning mist. A large swarm of Chu infantry, holding round shields and short swords, threw themselves at them. The Han phalanxes immediately commanded spearheads to turn to meet the enemy. But these long-handled weapons and tactics designed for phalanx combat were not adapted to fighting these short-weapon shock troops. That was supposed to be a contest between skirmishers of both sides. The Chu soldiers ignored casualties and rushed into the forest of long spears, blocking the thrusts of long spears with shields and ruthlessly stabbing short swords into the chests and throats of the Han soldiers. Long spear phalanxes without short weapons equipped were almost slaughtered once closed in on. And right at this moment, the mysterious Chu shock cavalry that had disappeared reappeared. They charged directly from the flank or even the rear, without even needing to use weapons, simply relying on the power of the war horses to slam solidly into the side and rear of the phalanx was enough to send all resistance flying. The morale of the Han phalanxes collapsed. They dropped their spears, they turned and ran. Behind them were the Chu infantry chasing them down. Beside them were the Chu cavalry charging faster than they could run. Morale collapse in a traditional war environment is the most deadly infectious disease. With the collapse of the Han front line, subsequent phalanxes also retreated involuntarily. A very few phalanxes managed to maintain formation, but having lost the protection of brother phalanxes on both sides, they were soon crushed by the pincer attack of Chu infantry and cavalry. The entire battlefield turned into a total collapse of the Han army. They threw away helmets and armor, wailing like ghosts and wolves as they fled backwards. Chu soldiers pursued ruthlessly from behind, and even the Yue cavalry archers took out short halberds to hunt down the fleeing Han troops. On the chaotic battlefield, the hegemon king of Chu, Xiang Yu, and his most elite guard cavalry were like divine punishment, unstoppable and invincible. The sun had risen, The morning mist was gradually disappearing, and on the plain battlefield outside Pengcheng, only the sound of killing shook heaven and earth. The Han troops fled for their lives, only to discover that the positions they had originally set up to protect the safety of their rear had become their death trap. The Xi River and Feng River blocked their retreat. They had originally hoped to organize a battle line on the river beach, but the Chu heavy cavalry chased them down, ruthlessly crushing their hope. So they completely gave up hope. Some surrendered, others threw themselves into the turbulent current of the Xi River. The river was full of Han soldiers vying to cross and drowned corpses everywhere. Historical records state, the river water ceased to flow. Amidst this chaos, some remnant Han troops hid southward into the hilly, mountainous areas, but the Chu army pursued relentlessly. They fled south all the way, but the river south of the hills blocked their path again. By the river beach, it was another tragic massacre. It is said that the pursuing Chu cavalry surrounded Liu Bang, 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Just when Liu Bang had no way out, a wild wind suddenly blew in the sky, flying sand and rolling stones, creating a flaw in the Chu cavalry's encirclement. Liu Bang's charioteer, Xiahou Ying, the #1 driver of the Chu-Han period, seized the moment to drive the chariot out of the heavy siege, saving Liu Bang's life. Then, dragging Liu Bang, they fled madly regardless of everything, moving north through the chaotic army, not stopping until they rushed into the camp of his brother-in-law, Ze. And that famous stain on Liu Bang's record, repeatedly kicking his children off the chariot to escape, relying entirely on Xiahou Ying to pick them back up, also happened during this escape process. In short, the Battle of Pengcheng ended. The 30,000 cavalry led by Xiang Yu, from strategic raid to tactical raid, caught the 560,000 coalition troops completely off guard, writing a famous battle example of the few defeating the many in Chinese war history. Afterwards, Liu Bang, having experienced the combat power of shock cavalry, learned on the fly and immediately began to gradually build his own heavy cavalry force. This was the later legendary Han Dynasty cavalry unit, the Langzhong cavalry, gentlemen of the household cavalry. But this is a matter for later. At this moment, Xiang Yu led the Chu army to continue attacking Liu Bang. Liu Bang ran all the way west to Qingyang, with the Chu army still in hot pursuit. At the critical moment, Han Xin arrived with the collected remnants and conscripted new recruits.